Serafina had never known kindness. For years this African leopard lived immersed in pain and fear, trapped in a world of cruelty. When rescuers finally found her in a poaching camp, she was huddled in a dark corner, trembling with such force that her entire body shook. No one could approach her without provoking a reaction of terror. She would cower, growl, and look away, as if she expected to disappear along with the world that had hurt her so much. Then Emma Parker appeared, a woman who would do the unthinkable and change Serafina's life forever. That day, Emma arrived as usual at the Second Chance Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. The fresh morning air and the golden light of the sun anticipated nothing out of the ordinary. However, upon crossing the entrance, she noticed the unusually worried expression of Director Johnson, a man weathered by years of tragic cases. Without saying much, he asked Emma to follow him down a long hallway to a secluded area of the center. There, the usual bustle of the animals faded into an unsettling silence. In the dim light of an isolated enclosure, Emma saw her, a magnificent African leopard huddled in the farthest corner. Her muscular body was motionless, covered by black and golden fur that barely shone under the faint light. But despite her imposing figure, everything about her trembled. Her ears were flat against her skull and her head low, almost touching the ground, as if trying to make herself invisible. Emma felt a knot in her chest. Through Serafina's eyes, she understood that she was not facing a simple captured wild animal, but a victim of profound abuse. For too long she had lived locked in a dirty cage without knowing a single touch that didn't bring pain. What Emma saw was not just fear, it was a broken soul. After briefly speaking with Johnson about the animal's condition and the unsuccessful attempts at approach, Emma decided to do something different. She didn't try to touch her or talk to her. Instead, she sat in silence right in front of the enclosure, without sudden movements, without gestures that could seem like a threat. She simply stayed there, present. Johnson's expression said it all. He was surprised, but Emma wasn't seeking approval. Her attention was completely focused on Serafina. She knew that trust was the first step toward healing, and she was willing to wait as long as necessary. Minutes passed, then hours. Serafina remained curled in her corner with her body tense and soul shrunken. Outside, the center continued with its routine. Volunteers came and went. Adopters walked dogs. The usual sounds filled the hallways. But none of that existed for Emma, only her and Serafina in that fragile silence. Although the leopard didn't move, Emma noticed a small difference. Serafina's ears were no longer completely flat. She was still alert, still cautious, but something in her posture had changed. A tiny glimmer, almost imperceptible, but real. She knew Emma was there. Johnson passed by several times, observing with skepticism. Emma said nothing, didn't argue, didn't try to convince him. There was no need. At that precise moment, a new signal. Serafina's ears moved barely, a slight gesture, but Emma saw it and knew what it meant. Her entire being was dedicated to that moment. She wasn't trying to force anything, just to be there, because sometimes, to heal a broken soul, the first thing needed is someone who is simply willing to wait in silence. Serafina's trembling intensified. She closed her eyes tightly as if with that she could disappear. However, she never looked away from Emma. That simple gesture was progress. It was enough for Emma to know she could continue forward. After what seemed like an eternity, the room fell silent again, barely interrupted by the distant sound of a metal bowl or the whisper of wind that crept in from outside. Emma exhaled carefully, then made her first movement. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small piece of cooked meat. The aroma filled the air and Serafina's nostrils stirred slightly. Calmly, Emma placed the food a couple of feet away from the leopard, not too close, but not far either. It was a discreet invitation, an opportunity. If Serafina really wanted it, she would have to take a step toward her. Emma waited. Serafina didn't move for many minutes. Emma continued breathing slowly, maintaining a relaxed posture. She wasn't going to force her or make the first approach. That choice had to be Serafina's. 5 minutes passed, then 10, until something happened. It was barely perceptible at first, a slight contraction in her front paw, a small movement of her nose. Although her body continued trembling, she was smelling the air. Emma held her breath. With an almost unreal slowness, Serafina advanced a single step, dragging her paw barely an inch. Emma felt her chest tighten with emotion, but she made no gesture. She couldn't risk frightening her. Another inch. The leopard's eyes blinked, and for a brief instant, their gazes met. It was a fleeting moment, but within it Emma perceived something buried under all the fear. A silent and fragile question born from the animal's broken soul. "Can I trust you?" Emma didn't respond with words. She simply remained present, quiet, respectful, and then Serafina took another trembling step forward, bringing her nose closer to the piece of meat. She hesitated once more, then took it and ran back to her corner. Emma felt tears burn in her eyes. She closed her fists over her lap. It wasn't much. It wasn't trust. But for the first time in her life, Serafina had voluntarily approached a human being, and that meant everything. The next morning, Emma arrived at the shelter before anyone else. The sun was just beginning to appear, tinting the hallways with a golden glow. Everything was quiet except for the soft murmur of animals in their enclosures. She breathed deeply before advancing down the corridor. Today was different. She no longer came only with hope for change. Today she had proof that something had begun. Upon reaching the enclosure, Serafina didn't cower or tremble like before. She remained still, watching her. Emma's heart skipped a beat. Slowly, she sat on the ground, adopting exactly the same posture as the day before. Serafina didn't react. She didn't back away. Just the fact of staying in place was progress. Her ears moved subtly in Emma's direction. It was the beginning of something. Calmly, Emma again pulled out a piece of meat from her pocket and placed it between them. Yesterday, it had taken Serafina almost an hour to approach. Today, she hesitated barely a minute. Her nose stirred. Her golden fur shone under the lights. She took one step, then another. Her body was still tense, still distrustful, but she wasn't paralyzed. Emma didn't even breathe when the leopard lowered her head. For a moment, it seemed she would regret it, but she didn't. She took the food, this time without panic or terror, but with caution. Emma swallowed, staying as still as possible. Then slowly, she turned her palm upward in a silent invitation. Serafina stopped. The piece of meat still hung between her teeth. Her eyes blinked hesitantly between Emma's extended hand and the ground. A few eternal seconds passed. Then the miracle happened. Serafina moved toward the hand. Not much, just enough for her whiskers to brush Emma's fingers. Emma's breathing faltered. She didn't move, didn't back away. And just when it seemed something more might happen, Serafina took a step back. Emma didn't allow disappointment to take hold of her, because today that wounded and distrustful creature had made the decision of her own will to approach, to try. And that, for Emma, was everything. The sound of Emma's soft breathing filled the space, and then, for the first time, Serafina's tail moved. It was a small wag, barely perceptible, a gesture as subtle as it was uncertain, but Emma saw it, and for the first time since meeting Serafina, she allowed herself to have hope. She knew that gesture was only the beginning. The next morning, Emma arrived at the shelter with a renewed sense of determination. Serafina had taken a step forward the night before, a deliberate, real step, and while she replayed the moment in her mind, she kept remembering that small movement of her tail. It hadn't been much, almost invisible, but it meant everything. As she approached the leopard's enclosure, she immediately noticed another change. Serafina had already seen her coming. She wasn't huddled in the corner or trembling violently. Her ears were no longer flattened back or alert with fear. Emma felt her heart swell with emotion as she gently lowered herself to the ground in her usual spot. Serafina didn't react. That small detail was progress. Emma reached into her pocket and pulled out another small piece of meat, carefully placing it between them. This time Serafina only hesitated for a few seconds. Then, cautiously, she took one step and then another. Emma remained motionless, her body relaxed, breathing calmly. Serafina's nose moved, sniffing the food, but instead of taking it and moving away like before, this time she looked at Emma's hand. There was a silent question in her eyes, a test of trust. Emma swallowed, and with slow, careful movements turned her palm upward in an invitation. Serafina froze. Emma could almost see the battle being fought inside her mind, fear against curiosity. For a long moment she didn't move. Then she made her decision. Serafina leaned forward. Her whiskers brushed Emma's fingers. Emma's breathing stopped. Then the miracle occurred. Serafina's nose pressed against her palm, not by accident, not out of necessity, but because she wanted to do it. Emma felt tears sting her eyes. She had let Serafina take the initiative. Then the leopard lowered her head a bit, her muzzle gently touching Emma's skin. Emma's heart beat slowly. With delicacy, with extreme gentleness, She moved her fingers, barely brushing Serafina's fur. The leopard shuddered for a second but didn't move away. Emma's fingertips barely touched her, but it was enough. Serafina felt it. She knew that this wasn't pain or cruelty. It was kindness. For the first time in her life, she had allowed a human to touch her. Emma knew with certainty there was no turning back. The next morning, Emma arrived at the shelter before dawn. The air was fresh, and the world still covered with a thin layer of frost. Everything was silent except for the slight whisper of animals awakening. But Emma wasn't thinking about the other animals. Her mind was fixed on Serafina. Yesterday, the leopard had let her touch her. It had been the moment when she chose to trust a human being, even if only for an instant. Today, Emma didn't know if there would be a new step, or if fear would dominate her again. She walked through the hallways with an accelerated pulse, approaching the enclosure, and then she saw her and her breath caught. Serafina wasn't hidden in the farthest corner. She was there, waiting. Her body was still tense but didn't reflect fear. Her ears were half raised, her golden green eyes fixed on Emma. She was waiting for her. Emma swallowed the knot in her throat and, like every day, slowly sat on the ground. Serafina didn't move. That simple gesture, that calm, was a victory. Emma reached into her coat and pulled out another piece of meat. But this time, instead of leaving it on the ground between them, she held it in her open palm. Could she trust? Serafina's nose wrinkled. Her body was still tense but no longer trembling. She observed the meat and then Emma. Another silent battle broke out, fear against trust. For a long moment nothing happened, and then very slowly, Serafina advanced one paw and then another. Emma remained completely still. Serafina lowered her head, and her nose brushed Emma's fingers before taking the food. It wasn't a gesture of panic or motivated by fear, but a calm act. Emma blinked rapidly, containing the emotion growing in her chest. That was real progress. Serafina was choosing to trust her. But what she did next was even more surprising. She lowered her head and gently rested it in Emma's open palm. It was a conscious decision, an act of unforced trust, not demanded but freely offered. Emma let out a trembling sigh. Serafina's tail moved slightly, and for the first time she didn't move away. The past still followed her, but that day she had taken her biggest step forward. Emma understood immediately. Serafina was ready for something more. That morning the air was fresher when Emma arrived at the shelter. Something felt different. For weeks Serafina hadn't been waiting for her, sitting on the cold concrete floor. But now she was there, not huddled, not fleeing, simply waiting, trusting. Emma couldn't forget what had happened the day before. Serafina had not only taken food from her hand, she had actively sought her contact, pressing her head into her palm, seeking human comfort for the first time. It was a moment etched in her memory, but now it was time to know if Serafina was ready for the next step. Emma crossed the shelter hallways until she stopped in front of the enclosure. What she saw almost made her cry. Serafina was standing, serene. She showed no fear or hesitation. She was waiting. Their eyes met. This time she didn't retreat to the corner as she used to do. There was a silent recognition between them. Emma felt her throat close, but she didn't let herself be overwhelmed. Instead, she did something she had never done. She slowly opened the enclosure door. She did it carefully, unhurriedly. Serafina tensed, but didn't flee. Emma watched as her ears rose slightly. Alert, yes, but not frightened. She knelt slowly, extending her open hand once more, an invitation or perhaps a challenge. For a long moment, Serafina didn't move. Emma didn't pressure her, didn't urge her, just waited. Then the unexpected happened. Serafina took a step forward. She crossed the invisible limit that for so long had kept her trapped in fear. Beyond the corner where she used to tremble, beyond the space of caution, she took a step toward Emma, and then another. She stopped in front of her, frowned slightly, and with unexpected gentleness pressed her head against Emma's chest. Emma let out a trembling breath and surrounded the leopard with her arms. Serafina didn't move away. She let herself be enveloped in that embrace, and for the first time in her life she found safety, found a connection, and this time she knew it was real because she herself had chosen it. In the weeks that followed, Serafina's transformation was evident. She no longer trembled, accepted food directly from Emma's hand without hesitation, and even allowed other staff members to approach her, though still with some caution. But Emma knew that was only the beginning. Serafina didn't belong in a cage, no matter how much affection she received. She belonged in nature, in the wild world where she could run free, be herself. Emma organized a meeting with the shelter management. She presented her plan to release Serafina. At first there was resistance. Some thought she had become too accustomed to humans, that perhaps she had lost her hunting skills, and that releasing her could put her in danger. But Emma was firm. They hadn't rescued her to lock her up for life. They had saved her so she could live as she should, free. Finally, the plan was approved. Serafina would be transferred to a remote area of Etosha National Park, where a natural population of leopards lived and human intervention was minimal. They would place a GPS collar on her to monitor her adaptation, but before releasing her, she had to relearn what her captivity had stolen from her. For a month, Emma worked tirelessly with Serafina. Instead of leaving food within reach, she began hiding it, forcing her to follow trails, to sniff, to chase. Serafina had to remember who she was, and Emma was determined to help her achieve it. At first, Serafina was clumsy, as if she had forgotten her most natural instincts. She moved with insecurity, disconnected from her wild essence. But with Emma's constant patience, little by little she began to remember. Day after day her powerful muscles tensioned, with more precision when launching at fictional prey. Her eyes became sharper, her focus firmer. Serafina became stronger, more confident, more alive. Finally, the day of her release arrived. Emma traveled with her, sitting next to the transport cage throughout the journey to the chosen location. Serafina wore a GPS collar carefully adjusted, not to make her uncomfortable. She traveled calmly, showing no fear. From time to time she would look up and gaze at Emma with a new expression. There was no longer fear, but a silent calm. When they arrived, an intense mixture of emotions took hold of Emma. Sadness because she was saying goodbye to the creature with whom she had shared so many moments, but also joy because she knew Serafina would finally have the life she always deserved. The cage was placed in front of a vast prairie that extended beyond the horizon. Emma knelt to one side and looked inside, seeking for the last time Serafina's eyes. There was no longer a shadow of doubt in them, no trace of fear, only serenity, determination, and perhaps something that resembled gratitude. Emma opened the door, but Serafina didn't run out. She took one step, then another, with her head held high, smelling the fresh air. She observed the new world opening before her with curiosity and caution. She turned and looked at Emma one last time. In that instant, there was a deep connection between them, a silent goodbye without words but full of meaning. Then Serafina walked away. At first slowly, her steps were measured, almost careful, but with each one, she seemed to recover a part of herself. Her gait became firmer, faster, until in a pure moment of freedom she began to run. Emma stood there, tears sliding down her face, watching as the leopard disappeared into the distance. Her golden fur shone under the sun. Her body moved with the grace of one who has returned to being what she is. Serafina ran until she became a barely visible point on the prairie, and then disappeared. But Emma knew that wasn't the end. It was a new beginning. Months later, Emma found herself in her small office at the rescue center, reviewing the GPS collar data. Serafina had not only survived, she had thrived. She had established her own territory, hunted successfully, and most incredibly, she had integrated with the local leopard population. Recent records showed something more, a very particular movement pattern, one Emma knew well, that of a mother caring for her cubs. Serafina had not only found freedom, she had found a family. Emma placed her hand against the screen, smiling through tears. Her work was done. Serafina had become what she always should have been, wild, free, and without fear. And perhaps, just perhaps, in some corner of the savannah, among those small cubs lived a part of their mother who still remembered, the woman who taught her that not all humans bring pain, that trust is possible, that patience can heal even the deepest wounds. Emma would never know the answer, but she knew one thing with certainty. The day Serafina took the meat directly from her hand, the day she chose to trust, changed them both forever. Because sometimes the most broken hearts are the ones that can love most deeply, and sometimes all that's needed is a gentle hand and infinite patience.